The thing that hurts most is that several of my old high school friends who never seemed to have much on the ball and did not even go to college now are very well established in their own businesses. But me, I'm just plodding along, auditing freight shipments. Had I been drilled a little more in why a small business can succeed, I would be better off in every way today. The thinking that guided Chuck's intelligence was a lot more important than the amount of Chuck's intelligence. Why some brilliant people are failures. I've been close for many years to a person who qualifies as a genius, has high abstract intelligence, and is Phi Beta Kappa. Despite this very high native intelligence, he is one of the most unsuccessful people I know. He has a very mediocre job. He is afraid of responsibility. He has never married. Lots of marriages end in divorce. He has few friends. People bore him. He has never invested in property of any kind. He might lose his money. This man uses his great brain power to prove why things won't work rather than directing his mental power to searching for ways to succeed. Because of the negative thinking that guides his great reservoir of brains, this fellow contributes little and creates nothing. With a changed attitude, he could do great things indeed. He has the brains to be a tremendous success, but not the thought power. Another person I know well was inducted into the army shortly after earning the PhD degree from a leading New York university. How did he spend his 3 years in the army? Not as an officer, not as a staff specialist. Instead, for 3 years he drove a truck. Why? Because he was filled with negative attitude towards fellow soldiers. I'm superior to them. Towards army methods and procedures, they are stupid. Toward discipline, it's for others, not me. Toward everything, including himself, I'm a fool for not figuring out a way to escape this trap. This fellow earned no respect from anyone. All his vast store of knowledge lay buried. His negative attitudes turned him into a flunky. Remember, the thinking that guides your intelligence is much more important than how much intelligence you have. Not even a PhD degree can override this basic success principle. Several years ago, I became a close friend of Phil F., one of the senior officers of a major advertising agency. Phil was director of marketing research for the agency and he was doing a bang up job. Was Phil a brain? Far from it. Phil knew next to nothing about research technique. He knew next to nothing about statistics. He was not a college graduate, though all of the people working for him were, and Phil did not pretend to know the technical side of the research. What then enabled Phil to command $30,000 a year, while not one of his subordinates earned $10,000? This Phil was a human engineer. Phil was 100% positive. Phil could inspire others when they felt low. Phil was enthusiastic. He generated enthusiasm. Phil understood people, and because he could really see what made them tick, he liked them. Not Phil's brains, but how he managed those brains made him 3 times more valuable to his company than men who rated higher on the IQ scale. Out of every 100 persons who enroll in college, fewer than 50 will graduate. I will I was curious about this, so I asked the director of admissions at large university for his explanation. It's not insufficient intelligence, he said. We don't admit them if they don't have sufficient ability, and it's not money. Anyone who wants to support himself in college today can do so. The real reason is attitudes. You would be surprised, he said, how many young people leave because they don't like their professor, the subjects they must take, and their fellow students. The same reason negative thinking explains why the door to top flight executive positions is close to many young junior executives. SAR, negative, pessimistic, depreciating attitudes rather than insufficient intelligence hold back thousands of young executives. As one executive told me, it's a rare case when we pass up a young fellow because he lacks brain. Nearly always it's attitude. Once I was retained by an insurance company to learn why the top 25% of the agents was selling over 75% of the insurance, while the bottom 25% of the agents sold only 5% of the total volume. Thousands of personnel files were carefully checked. The search proved beyond any question that no significant difference existed in native intelligence. What's more, differences in education did not explain the difference in selling success. The difference in very successful and the very unsuccessful finally reduced to differences in attitudes or differences in the thought management. The top group worried less, was more enthusiastic, had a sincere liking for people. We can't do much to change the amount of native ability, but we can certainly change the way we use what we have. Knowledge is power when you use it constructively. Closely allied to intelligence exquisiteness is some incorrect thinking about knowledge. We often hear that knowledge is power, but this statement is only a half truth. Knowledge is only a potential power. Knowledge is power only when put to use and then only when the use made of it is constructive. The story is told that the great scientist Einstein was once asked how many feet are in a mile. Einstein's reply was, I don't know. Why should I fill my brain with the facts I can find in 2 minutes in any standard reference book? Einstein taught us a big lesson. He felt it was more important to use your mind to think than to use it as a warehouse for facts. One time, Henry Ford was involved in a libel suit with the Chicago Tribune. The Tribune had called Ford an enormous, and Ford said, in effect, prove it. The Tribune asked him scores of simple questions such as who was Benedict Arnold, when was the Revolutionary War fought, and others, most of which Ford, who had a little formal education, could not answer. Finally, he became quite exasperated and said, I don't know the answers to those questions, but I could find a man in 5 minutes who does. Henry Ford was never interested in miscellaneous information. He knew what every major executive knows, that the ability to know how to get information is more important than using the mind as a garage for facts. How much is a fact man worth? I spent a very interesting evening recently with a friend who is the president of a young but rapidly growing manufacturing concern. The TV set happened to be turned to one of the most popular quiz programs. The fellow being quizzed had been on the show for several weeks. He could answer questions on all sorts of subjects, many of which seemed nonsensical. Further, the fellow answered a particularly odd question, something about a mountain in Argentina. My host looked at me and said, how much do you think I would pay that guy to work for me? How much? I asked. Not a cent over $300, not per week, not per month, but for life. I've sized him up. That expert can't think. He can only memorize. He's just a human encyclopedia, and I figure for $300 I can buy a pretty good set of encyclopedias. In fact, maybe that's too much. 90% of what that guy knows I can find in a $2 almanac. What I want around me, he continued, are people who can solve problems, who can think up ideas, people who can dream and then develop the dream into a practical application. An idea man can make money with me a fact man cannot. Three ways to cure intelligence executives. Three easy ways to cure intelligence executives are: number one, never underestimate your own intelligence and never overestimate the intelligence of others. Don't sell yourself short. Concentrate on your assets. Discover your superior. Discover your superior talents. Remember, it's not how many brains you've got that matters, rather, it's how you use your brains that counts. Manage your brains instead. Manage your brains instead of worrying about how much IQ you've got. Remind yourself several times a day, my attitudes are more important than my intelligence. At work and at home, practice positive attitude. See the reason why you can do it, not the reasons why you cannot. Develop an I am winning attitude. Put your intelligence to creative positive use. Use it to find ways to win, not to prove you will lose. Number three, remember that the ability to think is of much greater value than the ability to memorize facts. Use your mind to create and develop ideas to find new and better ways to do things. Ask yourself, am I using my mental ability to make history or am I using it merely to record history made by others? Number three, it's no use. I'm too old or too young. Age excusitis, the failure of disease of never being the right age, comes in two easily identifiable forms. I'm too old variety and I'm a too young brand. You've heard hundreds of people of all ages explain their mediocre performance in life something like this. I'm too old or too young to break it now. I can't do what I want to do or am capable of doing because of my age handicap. Really? It's surprising how few people feel they are just right age wise, and it's unfortunate. This excuse has closed the door of real opportunity to thousands of individuals. They think their age is wrong, so they don't even bother to try. The I'm too old variety is the most common form of age excusitis. The disease is spread in subtle ways. TV fiction is produced about the big executive who lost his job because of a merger and cannot find another because he's too old. Mr. Executive looks for months to find another job, but he cannot, and in the end, after contemplating suicide for a while, he decides to rationalize that it's nice to be on the shelf. Plays and magazines articles on the topic why you are washed up at 40 are popular not because they represent true facts but because they appeal to many worried minds looking for an excuse. How to handle age excusitis? Age excusitis can be cured. A few years ago, while I was conducting a sales training program, I discovered a good serum that both cures this disease and vaccinates you so you would not get in get it in the first place. In that training program, there was a trainee named Cecil. Cecil, who was 40, wanted to shift over to set himself up as manufacturer's representative, but he thought he was too old. After all, he explained, I would have to start from scratch and I'm too old for that now. I'm 40. I talked with Cecil several times about the old age problem. I use the old medicine. You are only as old as you feel, but I found I was getting nowhere. Too often people retort with, but I do feel old. Finally, I discovered a method that worked. One day after a training session, I tried it on Cecil. I said, Cecil, when does a man's productive life begin? He thought a couple of seconds and answered, "Oh, when he's about 20, I guess." Okay, I said, "Now when does a man's productive life end?" Cecil answered, "Well, if he stays in good shape and likes his work, I guess a man's still pretty useful when he's 70 or so." Alright, I said, "A lot of folks are highly productive after they reach 70, but let's agree with what you have just said. A man's productive years stretch from 20 to 70, that's 50 years in between, or half centuries." "Cecil," I said, "you're 40. How many years of productive life have you spent?" 20, he answered. "And how many have you left?" 30, he replied. "In other words, Cecil, you have not even reached the halfway point. You have used up only 40% of the productivity of your years." I looked at Cecil and realized she had gotten the point. He was cured of age exquisites. Cecil saw that he still had many opportunity filled years left. He switched from thinking, "I'm already old" to "I'm still young." Cecil now realized that how old we are is not important. It's one's attitude towards age that makes it a blessing or a barricade. Curing yourself of age excuses often opens door to opportunities that you thought were locked tight. A relative of mine spent years doing many different things, selling, operating his own business, working in a bank, but he never quite found what he really wanted to do most. Finally, he concluded that the one thing he wanted more than anything else was to be a minister. But when he thought about it, he found he was too old. After old, After all, he was 45, had three young children and little money. But fortunately, he mustered all of his strength and told himself, "45 or not, I am going to be a minister." With tons of faith but little else, he enrolled in a 5 year ministerial training program in Wisconsin. 5 years later, he was obtained as a minister and settled down with a fine congregation in Illinois. Old, of course not. He still has 20 years of productive life ahead of him. I talked with this man not long ago, and he said to me, if I had not made that great decision when I was 45, I would have spent the rest of my life growing old and bitter. Now I feel every bit as young as I did 25 years ago." And he almost looked it too. When you kick age exquisites, the natural result is to gain the optimism of youth and feel of youth. When you beat down your fears of age limitations, you add years to your life as well as success. A former university college of mi- a former university colleague of mine provides an interesting angle on how age exquisites was defeated. Bill was graduated from Harvard in the 1920s. After 24 years in the stock brokerage business, during which time he made a modest fortune, Bill decided he wanted to become a college professor. Bill's friends warned him that he would overtax himself in the rugged learning program ahead. But Bill was determined to reach his goal and enrolled in the University of Illinois at the age of 51. At 55, he had earned his degree. Today, Bill is the chairman of Department of Economics at a fine liberal arts of college. He is happy too. He smiles when he says, "I've got almost a third of my good years left." Old age is a failure disease, defeated by refusing to let it hold you back.